Part 14. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Amos Yenyu. Chapter 131. Time flies like a white horse passing by, and a short month has passed like quicksand on the fingertips. On the streets of the city ruins dozens of kilometers away from the Yuhei base, a ball of pale yellow flame appeared in the sky accompanied by the crazy roar of zombies. Fire Fist. The young man's tender voice came out, and a large ball of flame suddenly appeared on the fist of a fiery red boy. With a loud shout from the young man, the hot and boiling flame smashed towards the surging group of zombies below. The huge ball of fire hit the ground, and a scorching wave swept around. Many zombies were hit by this wave of fire, all of them let out a shrill roar, and their bodies were burned and rotten. After releasing the fireball, the boy bent over, his hands on his knees, his chest heaving up and down, and even his forehead was soaked with sweat. Obviously, this move also consumed a lot of him. But right in front of the red-haired boy, there were still a large number of weird zombies rushing towards him. Suddenly, a squirrel with red eyes and a body as big as a wild boar rushed towards the zombies in front with a bloody mouth. The violent collision instantly took away a large number of zombies, and the abandoned shops behind were instantly hit and rubble flew, and smoke and dust were scattered. The huge squirrel leaned out of the collapsed house and shook off the debris left on its fur. The huge front teeth were stained with blood, and the violent intent in the scarlet eyes did not decrease at all, and turned to rush towards the zombie group on the other side. Looking at the fierce mutant squirrel in front of him, a single squirrel fighting hundreds of zombies, Lin Feng's mind was slightly relieved, but then, a gust of wind sounded from the boy's ears. The red-haired boy widened his eyes in horror, a pair of sharp nails had already pierced his eyes, but what he saw was a hideous face. What appeared in front of him was a swift mutant zombie. A ball of grey mist suddenly exploded from behind the zombie, and a purple petite figure suddenly appeared, followed by a sharp cold light that cut the mutant zombie's neck. Blood spurted out, and the zombie's head fell to the ground. Shueqinya's figure emerged from the grey mist, still with a cold face, but the dead silence emanating from her body became more and more intense, and the icy coldness made strangers stay away. Lin Feng breathed a sigh of relief, turned around and grinned at Shueqinya, and gave a thumbs up. Shueqinya's face showed no expression, and she nodded gently, and her figure disappeared again under the grey-black mist. Lin Feng looked at the obviously reduced number of zombies in front of him, and suddenly a surge of blood surged in his heart, and his fighting spirit boiled. He jumped and joined the battle again. The irrational roar of the zombie monsters and the smell of blood together became the main theme of this block. After a few incense sticks of time, the roar of the zombies became weaker and weaker, until the last zombie on the block fell to the ground with eyes wide open, and hundreds of zombies had completely died. In this remote urban block, hundreds of zombies have occupied most of the block, and it will take at least a few hours for a new batch of zombies to gather and emerge. The giant mutant squirrel's body was already scarred, covered with scratches from zombies and wounds from monster bites, and blood dripped on its brown fur. At this moment, Lin Feng's clothes were all soaked with sweat, but this time he did not lose control and run away like before. Lin Feng's face was filled with joy. He knew that after more than a month of hard training, he finally met the teacher's requirements. The red-haired boy, who was exhausted but smiling, jogged excitedly until he ran out of the street and saw a clear river in front of him. The boy ran to the river with a happy smile on his face, but his face froze in the next second. A handsome man in a black windbreaker sat by the river. The strange thing was that there seemed to be a world-avoiding barrier around the man, and there was not a single zombie heretic. The most outrageous thing was that the man sat on a stool he had found from somewhere with a smile on his face. In front of him was a grill with wisps of black smoke burning in the grill, and a row of red meat skewers were rolling and roasting on the grill. The aroma of the food was carried into Lin Feng's nose through the air, and even Shueqinya and Su Wen, who came behind him, looked at the bonfire that stretched to the horizon with astonishment. Mu Qiu waved the smoke from the barbecue grill with a palm leaf fan in his hand. When the students arrived, he smiled and said to Lin Feng, "Xiao Linzi, you're here just in time. Add some fire." Burp. Lin Feng rubbed his stomach with satisfaction and lay on the grass by the river. His feet were covered with leftover skewers. Shui Qianya and Su Wen also sat aside, picking up the skewers on the grill and licking their index fingers. A cool breeze blew along the river, and Lin Feng felt a sense of satisfaction and happiness that he had never felt before. "Hey, everyone!" Lin Feng suddenly turned his head and looked to the side. Everyone's eyes were attracted by Lin Feng, and the red-haired boy suddenly asked, "What is your dream for the future?" The scene became silent in an instant. They didn't expect the boy to suddenly ask this question. "My dream is to become a hero who protects mankind like the characters in the comics." When he said this, Lin Feng clenched his fists and raised them above his head, and his eyes seemed to be shining with stars. Just as he desperately wanted to make himself stronger, Lin Feng didn't want to be regarded as a monster by others anymore. He wanted to be a hero praised and respected by everyone. "My dream is to get a lot of crystal cores." Su Wen hesitated for a moment, but still expressed her thoughts. She hoped to use the crystal cores to exchange for the opportunity for her father's limbs to regenerate. Although she had withdrawn from the state of corpse G blessing, Shui Qianya still had an inexplicable coldness on her body. She looked at her with a quiet look and said seriously, "I want to become stronger." This is the most simple idea in this doomsday. Where is the teacher? What is the teacher's dream? Lin Feng suddenly looked at Mu Qiu and asked. Shui Qianya and Su Wen also looked at him intently. They were also a little curious about the future plans of this Ice King. Mu Qiu was lying flat on the lawn next to Lin Feng, with his eyes closed and a wild grass in his mouth. When hearing the student's question, Mu Qiu stretched out his hand to block the dazzling sunlight, and said lazily, "Before, I just wanted to be a salted fish drifting with the flow, free and unrestrained all day, and living a carefree and happy life is good." Mu Qiu was talking about himself whose consciousness was still in modern life, but this simplest idea has become the luxury of most people in this apocalypse. As for now, Mu Qiu narrowed his eyes slightly, his long eyelashes drooped to cover his eyes, and his hand that blocked the sunlight clenched suddenly, looking as if he wanted to hold the entire sun. "I want to stand at the top of this world, and then be a salted fish king. After all, there are too many unknown existences in this world. Even the destruction level flame demon lord dare not say that he can fight all the destruction level monsters alone. Warm TI. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MOCNU. Chapter 132. Several students were still confused by Mu Qiu's answer, and seemed to understand but not quite. "After all, don't you still want to be a salted fish?" Throwing several students in the ruins of a city full of zombie monsters, and running to the river to barbecue, is there anything more salted than this? Mu Qiu smiled indifferently at the reactions of the three students. "It's not so easy to be a salted fish. Even if you are a lying web writer, you still have to bear the risk of being stabbed by readers." Standing up and stretching, Mu Qiu's slender body straightened, and smiled at several students. "Since you have passed the challenge I designed for you, then I, as a teacher, should also give you some rewards." Just as several people were confused, they saw Mu Qiu took out a palm-sized, mechanical ball. "Space storage set." A strange light flashed, and Mu Qiu suddenly had a few more items in his hands. Mu Qiu handed a pair of white gloves that looked like pure cotton to Lin Feng. Lin Feng, with red hair, accepted the gloves with stars in his eyes. No matter what, Lin Feng, who had not received any gifts for several years, cherished the gift from his teacher very much. Mu Qiu nodded and chuckled, saying, "Try to use your supernatural power after you put them on." Lin Feng curiously put on the plain-looking white cotton gloves on his hands, and then his mind moved, and red light flashed in his eyes, trying to activate the hidden flame energy in his body. But in the next moment, Lin Feng felt that the flame in his body had a tendency to run away out of control. The originally light yellow flame wrapped around his fists, and then heated up rapidly in an instant, and the light yellow flame instantly turned into a scorching red. Lin Feng was surprised to find that he strangely did not run away again this time. What surprised him was that the original pair of cotton gloves on his hands had turned into a high-tech metal material at some point. There was a striking X mark on the back of the gloves, and the joints were clearly visible, fitting tightly on the palm like armor. What's even more terrifying is that the metal gloves that look like close-fitting hand armor are burning with raging flames from his energy. What is this? Lin Feng spread his hands and looked at the red flames burning fiercely in his hands in disbelief. This is a high-tech equipment on the exchange, called the X-Gloves, which can absorb the violent energy in your body and convert it into controllable flames. This set of rhetoric is of course bluffing. What really suppressed the violent power in Lin Feng's body was that he released a trace of the breath of the flame demon in the gloves. As for the X-Gloves themselves, they are just a high-tech container that absorbs energy. Mu Qiu turned around and looked at Su Wen standing aside. The girl was still wearing a short skirt, standing there cutely and quietly. Mu Qiu took out a few balls of the same palm size, similar in style to the space storage group, but the color on the balls was blue and white. This is quite interesting. It is the latest research result of that high-tech base. It can store some life forms with weak mental power in it. It should be the most suitable equipment for Wen Wen. This palm-sized sphere can store some low-minded mutant beasts in a small space, provided that the life form cannot have the slightest consciousness of resistance. It can be summoned at any time when necessary, which is quite similar to the Pokemon ball. It's just that this technology is not yet mature and is far from the point of storing humans. But I believe that with the continuous advancement of technology, it will soon be possible to develop a space that can accommodate humans. Mu Qiu is becoming more and more curious about the high-tech base called Zilan Base. What kind of supernatural power can invent so many advanced equipment across the ages? Su Wen excitedly picked up a Pokemon ball in her hand, and took the squirrel on her shoulder into it like a curious baby. Then a white light flashed, and the confused squirrel returned to its original place. Looking at the two disciples who were overjoyed after receiving the gifts, Mu Qiu raised the corners of his mouth and turned his attention to the last student. Mu Qiu moved his footsteps and slowly walked to Shueqianya. Under the latter's stunned eyes, he took out a black round ring and put it on Shueqianya's hand. This ring is very special. It can help you convert corpse Qi into your own superpowers to a greater extent. Mu Qiu had noticed Shueqianya's unique use of her ability to control corpses a long time ago. By absorbing the corpse Qi emitted from the bodies of zombies and adding it to her own body, the corpse Qi is converted into superpowers, so that she can temporarily obtain some of the superpowers of zombies. This is a very flexible use of the superpower of controlling corpses, but at the same time, the blessing of corpse Qi will also have a certain negative effect on Shueqianya's body. Mu Qiu added the devouring power of a ninja from the Black Shadow core to this ring, so that this ring played the role of a converter. Shueqianya retracted her astonished eyes, and then she realized that Mu Qiu had put a lot of effort into the three of them, and each piece of equipment fit the characteristics of their own superpowers to a great extent. A long-lost warmth emerged in her heart. Like Lin Feng, Shueqianya was rarely noticed because of her special abilities and personality. "Thank you, thank you." The slightly awkward words came out of the girl's cold mouth. She hadn't said such words to anyone for a long time. "You're welcome. This is the reward you got for completing my challenge." For 2 months, Mu Qiu did not teach the 3 students any skills. Instead, he threw them into the ruins of the city every now and then to train them. After dozens of life and death situations, Lin Feng and the other 2 were trained to the state they are in today. Mu Qiu does not need worthless subordinates. While training the 3, isn't he also training his own team? If Lin Feng and the other two did not meet his requirements, Mu Qiu would never give them these pieces of equipment. It's almost time to go back. I believe that your real challenge will begin soon. Mu Qiu narrowed his eyes, smiled, and looked up at the dazzling sunlight in the sky. The teaching period is about to pass, and the awakening trial belonging to Lin Feng and the other two will officially begin. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 133. It was already dusk when Mu Qiu sent the three students back to Yuhei base. After the lesson learned last time, Mu Qiu simply used her mental power to interfere with the locator on Su Wen's body to prevent anyone from causing trouble again. A ray of yellow light reflected on the horizon and spread across the sky. The burning clouds dyed the sky into strange colors. At this moment, there were no pedestrians on both sides of the street, and the huge street was extremely deserted. This time is the meal time set by the Yuhei base, and most of the survivors who have no livelihood will rush to specific locations to receive relief food. Mu Qiu was wearing a windbreaker and walking slowly on the deserted street. Just when passing by a park, Mu Qiu suddenly stopped. In the long abandoned park, the broken and rusty entertainment facilities are covered with wounds. The afterglow of the setting sun makes the entire park look eerily silent. And deep in the empty park, there is a small swing that moves automatically without wind. Mu Qiu turned around and saw a petite girl wearing a snow-white dress sitting on the swing. The girl has long silver-white hair hanging down around her waist, her light blue pupils are full of clear innocence, and her delicate and charming appearance is extremely cute. The silver-haired girl pushed her feet on the ground, as if she wanted to use the force to swing the swing, but the length was not long enough for her feet to touch the ground. Her white hands began to shake the hemp ropes on both sides. But the girl's petite strength couldn't swing the swing at all. In desperation, the silver-haired girl frowned and puffed her mouth out in anger. After a while, the girl let out a sigh of relief. Need help? At this moment, a gentle voice suddenly came from behind. The girl turned her head subconsciously and saw a handsome man wearing a black windbreaker standing in front of her. With a faint smile on her face, Mu Qiu slowly stretched out her hand to push the swing in front of her. The girl's expression changed from one of astonishment at first, to a look of excitement suddenly bursting out of her light blue clear eyes. Can you see me? Mu Qiu smiled and nodded, looking at the increasingly excited silver-haired girl, her eyes narrowed. He could clearly see a transparent white halo emanating from the girl's body. As the girl just said, normal humans should not be able to see her existence. Even Mu Qiu stopped at first just because she noticed the swing. Abnormality. But it was this inexplicable halo that instantly attracted his attention, like a bright light in the dark night. The girl in front of her that even Mu Qiu couldn't see clearly was definitely not an ordinary existence. Why don't you go home so late, little sister? The girl seemed to be still immersed in the joy of talking to others. When she heard Mu Qiu's question, the silver-haired girl's face darkened at first, and then she raised her head and pointed to the sky excitedly. This is my home. Mu Qiu looked at the direction the girl pointed at. He knew that the home the girl mentioned was the entire Yuhei base. As the swing rose and soared, the smile on the girl's face brightened, and she spread her hands, completely defenseless against the stranger Mu Qiu behind her. Mu Qiu already had a guess in her mind, but she still asked with a smile on her face. May I have your name? When asked about her name, the girl seemed to become interested, with a clear color in her innocent light blue eyes. Meow meow, my name is Meow meow. Really? Even though she already had the answer in her heart, Mu Qiu's expression still changed slightly. The silver-haired girl in front of her is none other than Meow meow, one of the three guardians of Yuhei, the destructive ace held by Xiao Hanyan. Recently, many awakened people have been attacked and killed in the base, which has caused panic among many people in the base. In the office of a senior executive in Yuhei, Wei Ying was reporting to the screen in front of him. At the large desk in front of him, a group of senior executives from the Yuhei base were sitting. On the photo on the big screen in front of him, the tragic situation of multiple dead people was clearly shown. The ferocious face was full of fear, and there was an obvious cut on his neck, with blood flowing out of the artery. Just from the expressions of these people, you can tell what kind of panic they experienced before they died. The bodies of these deceased people were all bound by cloth or something, and then they were fatally struck by some kind of sharp weapon. The killer fled quickly after the attack. He was obviously very familiar with the environment. Preliminary judgment, the killer is probably hiding in the base. The awakened one within. Wei Ying glanced at the crowd with his sharp eyes, and then continued, and the common characteristic of these dead people is that they are all awakened ones who belong to the Shenlong society. As Wei Ying finished speaking, the entire conference room fell into a strange dead silence. It is not uncommon for moles to appear in the base, and the law enforcement team has even arrested many spies from the alien section. However, this is the first time that a mole has personally killed so many people in the base. He. Wang Daipen, who was wearing a ripped jacket, was leaning on a chair with his legs on the desk, and a grin suddenly appeared on his face. It seems that someone in the base is very dissatisfied with the style of my Shenlong association. Wang Daipen's body faintly exuded a palpitating aura, which made several of the surrounding Yuhei executives secretly swallow their saliva. This is the pressure of a destructive powerhouse. Or is it that someone is dissatisfied with me, Wang Daipen? Wang Daipen glanced at everyone, and the destructive pressure on his body frightened the senior executives so much that they dared not look at him. Enough. Xiao Hanyan, who was sitting opposite, was not afraid of the destructive pressure at all. She looked at Wang Daipen with cold eyes and said sternly, "Do you suspect that the Yuhei senior executives are targeting your Shenlong club? Why is President Wang so angry? I believe the law enforcement team will give you a satisfactory answer." Zhang Qingwei, who was sitting on the other side, had a kind face, stroking a string of sandalwood Buddhist beads in his hand, looking like he was going to be a peacemaker. "That's not what I meant." Wang Daipen's momentum subsided, he crossed his legs on the table, and chuckled, "Of course I believe in the ability of the law enforcement team, and I believe that the law enforcement team will give me a satisfactory explanation. Otherwise, then I will come to catch this little mouse myself. Of course, the process will not be too peaceful." Wang Daipen suddenly looked at the corner of the desk, where a man with white clothes, white hair, and black framed glasses sat, Ji Yufeng. The White Death God, who was rumored in the base, pushed his glasses lightly. No one could see the expression under the frame under the light curtain. He said indifferently, "I will catch him." The tone was flat, but it gave people a feeling that it could not be questioned. Many Yuhei executives nodded. The White Death God personally took action, and with his weird and unpredictable space ability, very few people could escape from Ji Yufeng. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the Flame Demon Lord. Author, MOCNU. Chapter 134. With the White Death, I'm naturally relieved. Wang Daipen had a sneer on his face. No one could guess what this madman was thinking at the moment. Xiao Hanyan nodded to Wei Ying. She didn't want to talk nonsense with Wang Daipen. The next is the most important information today. Wei Ying suddenly changed the subject, and the picture on the screen changed. A dark tide of corpses appeared in the center of the screen with a shrill roar. The monstrous horde of corpses was terrifying. The hideous zombies gathered in one direction with uniform steps. Their scarlet bloodthirsty pupils, strange shapes, and hideous faces swept in with heavy steps like a wave. If the camera was not stretched, even the horrifying faces of these monsters could not be seen clearly. For unknown reasons, the zombies in the yellow zone of Lannan City suddenly rioted, forming a huge zombie tide that attacked the base. It is estimated that there are about tens of thousands of zombies in this zombie tide. When this was said, many Yuhei executives present were all shocked. Tens of thousands of zombies invaded the Yuhei base? You know, the population of the survivors of the entire Yuhei base is only tens of thousands. If tens of thousands of zombies attacked the Yuhei base at once, Yuhei would not be destroyed, but it would also be a big blow. But then, Wei Ying came with a piece of good news that made everyone feel a little relieved. After investigation, the general level of these zombies is below A level, and there are very few zombies that reach B level. Basically, most of them are ordinary zombies. It seems that after that incident, the zombies in the yellow zone of Lannan City have not yet produced higher level existences. When saying this, Wei Ying looked at Ji Yufeng on the side, and even the surrounding Yuhei high-level people turned their eyes to the indifferent White Death God. They all knew that Ji Yufeng had led the law enforcement team to encircle and suppress the Iwanjiao stronghold in Lannan City. The Iwanjiao gathered a large number of high-level zombies to fight back, but in the end these monsters were buried under Ji Yufeng and the law enforcement team and search team led by him. Although for some unknown reason, after several months, there is still no high-level zombie heretic born in these zombie groups, but it is unquestionable that Ji Yufeng has made a contribution. The name of the White Death God is well deserved. Facing the respectful gazes of the crowd, Ji Yufeng's face remained cold, but he turned to ask, "What's the situation in the red zone?" The red zone is the most dangerous place in a city. It is full of terrifying zombie monsters and unknown dangerous secrets. Even the strong men of the destruction level dare not easily step into it. Ji Yufeng put the problem on point. Even if these tens of thousands of ordinary zombies are weak in comparison, if the powerful monsters in the red zone also riot together, it will be a bit challenging for you. Wei Ying shook his head, which is exactly what he wanted to say. Through surveillance, the monsters in the red zone are not in a state of riot. Then everyone was relieved. A group of ordinary zombies that are not a big deal, although it is a problem, it is not worth it for them to worry. Then ask the soldiers of the law enforcement team to eliminate these zombies. A middle-aged man suggested. His name is Chu Hanbei, and he is the person in charge of the exchange office under Zhang Qingwei. Wait. At this moment, Wang Deipen, who had been silent, suddenly spoke. Why bother the law enforcement team to take action for such a small matter? Wang Deipen grinned, revealing a mouthful of white silver teeth. I have an idea. Haven't the new awakeners in those bases been tested yet? Why not treat this zombie tide as a test for these awakeners? As soon as these words came out, many Yuhei executives present were shocked again. I don't agree. The upright Wei Ying took the lead in making the decision. Sending those children to face such a large group of zombies is sending them to their deaths. Wei Ying can understand sacrifice, but cannot tolerate such meaningless sacrifice. Haha, Captain, don't you understand the current situation? Wang Deipen's eyes suddenly became fierce. From the moment they awakened their superpowers, they are no longer simple children, they are warriors born to kill. If they can't even withstand this challenge, they will be nothing more than useless artillery fire on the battlefield in the future. Wang Deipen's madness seemed to last only a moment, and then he returned to his indifferent attitude and scratched his ears. Of course, if you want to raise these flowers in a greenhouse, just ignore what I said. Even so, there are still many ways to train. Before he finished speaking, Zhang Qingwei's voice suddenly interrupted. I agree with President Wang's suggestion. It's harmless to let those children go through some hardships. This is also a good opportunity to select seeds worth cultivating for the base. Being retorted by the leaders of the two major forces in the base, Wei Ying's face was a little ugly, but he still said. But the specific situation in the corpse tide is still unknown. It is not ruled out that there are high-level heretics in it. So what? Wang Deipen's eyes flashed, and he smiled. the instructors of those awakened ones can't be just eating for free, right? Wei Ying suddenly thought of something, and his pupils widened. You. The remarks made by Wang Deipen were obviously selfish. At this moment, Xiao Hanyan, with a frosty face, spoke, I agree with your plan. The cold voice carried a sense of decisiveness, and everyone present looked at the Queen of Yuhe, who was wearing a white military uniform and had a majestic temperament. Xiao Hanyan raised her eyebrows and said sternly, I can accept your proposal, but there is one thing, the operation of this awakener test will be fully responsible by the law enforcement team. In Lannan City, hundreds of kilometers away from the Yuhe base, a dark tide of corpses was surging on the horizon. As the sun set, the roars of zombies and the low hums of unknown monsters echoed in this lonely city. A strong mutant zombie crawled at the forefront of the corpse tide. A palm-sized pink butterfly suddenly landed slowly on the zombie's head. A group of strange pink halo flashed, and the huge mutant zombie suddenly became sluggish, and the white pupils gradually became empty. In just a few breaths, the zombie's huge body fell to the ground, and countless hungry zombies around it began to scramble to eat its flesh and blood. The enchanting pink butterfly fluttered in the air, and gradually landed on the top of a tall building not far away. A small hand with white jade fingers took the butterfly, and more butterflies flew around the roof. A girl in a red dress was sitting on the top of the tall building, her delicate bare feet dangling in the air, holding a blood-red umbrella, and her red eyes stared at the surging corpses below without blinking. Suddenly, the girl put her white jade fingers on her rosy cherry mouth and licked them gently, and a giggle of laughter came out of her mouth. We will meet soon. Brother. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MOCNU. Chapter 135. In the early morning, when Mu Qiu took Yu Qi's hand and came to the stadium of the training base, many awakened people in different clothes had gathered on the open ground. Most of these awakened people were young, in their teens, and Mu Qiu's 3 students were also among them. Teacher. Lin Feng, who was standing in the crowd, saw Mu Qiu and waved excitedly. With the previous lesson, this rebellious boy never dared to be late in front of the teacher again. The other awakened people around them all flashed a look of surprise when they saw Yu Qi. Her delicate face like an angel seemed to be carefully carved by God, with soft pink ponytails tied behind her head, delicate skin white and tender, and a white dress exuding purity and clarity. Such a top-notch girl was extremely rare even before the end of the world. Then everyone saw Mu Qiu holding Yu Qi's white wrist. Is it that Bing Jun? The crowd suddenly realized that only a powerful being like Bing Jun was qualified to get such a top-notch woman. Some well-informed awakeners also knew that Yue was unusual, and the terrifying ability to bless people and increase their superpowers also shocked them. Envy, jealousy, vigilance, fear, all kinds of eyes gathered on the two of them. Mu Qiu ignored these eyes and walked in front of the 3 students with a faint smile. Since returning to the base, Yue's life has basically been in the villa. This time, Mu Qiu simply took Yue out for a ride. Well, for Mu Qiu, the city ruins filled with zombies and monsters outside are like his own backyard. Hello, Sister Yue. The 3 students have long known this beautiful big sister, but they don't understand why the teacher brought Yue. In their opinion, Yue was completely hidden in a golden house by their black-bellied teacher. Now he brought her out to show off. Yue nodded, without saying anything, just stood beside Mu Qiu obediently. Mu Qiu looked around and saw that the entire stadium was already filled with hundreds of people. Among these people were young awakeners, and teachers who were responsible for teaching these new awakeners. There were also some survivors in ordinary clothes, who were standing outside the iron net that separated the stadium, looking at their children in the stadium with hopeful and complicated eyes. After becoming an awakener, it means that their quality of life will be much better than that of ordinary people, but with power, they also bear huge risks. You know, Before the end of the world, these children were just in middle school, but now they have to risk their lives to fight zombie monsters, which is really sad. Looking around, Miu actually met a few acquaintances. Chunan, the playboy who still wore sunglasses and dressed very flamboyantly in the end of the world, turned his head away with a weird look when Miu's eyes passed by. He is not a fool. Miu dared to commit crimes openly in the base under the protection of Xiao Hanyan. With his powerful S-level strength, Chunan has already listed him as a lawless madman like Wang Deipen in his heart. After seeing Miu's ruthlessness, if Chunan dares to provoke him again, it would be a disaster. Miu ignored Chunan's disguised show of weakness. In his heart, the bet has been made. He will personally take Chunan's head at that time. Similarly, Miu also saw Jiyu's figure not far away. The short-haired female teacher waved her hand and smiled after seeing Miu, which was considered a return gift. "Hey, isn't this Miu?" A familiar voice suddenly came from behind. Miu looked back and found a familiar figure. The person who came was a fat young man with a short haircut, who was the fat man in Wei Linger's team before. "Why are you here?" Even Miu was slightly surprised to meet Fatty here. Shouldn't he be sleeping on the big bed in the red light district of the base at this time? The fatty came forward and greeted Miu familiarly. Hearing Miu's question, he raised his head and said, "Why, can't I be a teacher?" Miu looked and saw that there were several young children following the fatty. They were involuntarily emitting weak energy, and it was obvious that they had just awakened. "I didn't expect that the fatty had also got a job as a teacher in the base." Miu looked strange and said, "You didn't squander the money you got from searching for supplies and come here to make extra money, did you?" The fatty coughed a few times and said guiltily, "What are you talking about? I'm here to train more talents for our base. By the way, Miu, you have made a difference. The reputation of Bing Jun has spread throughout Yuhe." The fatty still looks a little shocked when he looks at Miu. He also didn't expect that the newbie he had considered a new member of the team and intended to take care of would grow into the famous Jade Sea Ice Lord in just a few months. Even the S-level shadow under Wang Deipen was no match for him. Miu smiled lightly and didn't comment. While they were talking, a team of dozens of law enforcement officers wearing black uniforms stood in front of the high platform of the training ground. The leader had a resolute face and sharp eyes. He was Wei Ying, one of the two captains of the law enforcement team. As the captain of the guard team, he naturally had a lot of prestige in the space of tens of thousands of people. His hawk-like eyes swept over, and the hundreds of people on the field suddenly fell silent, and all looked up at Wei Ying. I saw Wei Ying say, "This Awakener test is slightly different from the previous ones." The many Awakeners below looked at each other. As far as they knew, the previous test was just a competition between Awakeners, and those who performed well would be included in the law enforcement team. It sounds like the content of this Awakener test has changed. Wei Ying's face was serious, and he could not see any joy or anger. "This time, the Awakener test, you have to go deep into the ruins of the city to hunt zombies. Go deep into the city. Hunt zombies." As soon as these words came out, the whole audience was silent for a moment, and then there was an uproar. The eyes of the Awakeners, whether students or teachers, flashed with fear. Only a few Awakeners like Miu who had already known the news could remain calm, and the rest of the humans were all shocked. The strength of these emerging Awakeners is generally around sea level, and there are even some who have just awakened to the superpower but are only D level, which is about the same strength as ordinary people. Now, these children are forced to face the zombie monsters that eat people and shed blood in the city. How can they not feel panic? It's starting to get interesting. Miu's mouth corners raised, with a hint of anticipation in his eyes. This is what makes him feel interesting. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 136. Boss, I brought you the stuff from Zilan base. In the underground bar of Yuhei base, a tattooed gangster held a leather box in his hand and handed it to Wang Daipen with a face full of courtesy. At this moment, Wang Daipen's eyes were filled with a genuine desire. For him, any item that can enhance his strength is the target of his greedy desire. Slowly opening the switch of the leather box, a heavy sawtooth broadsword was placed flat inside. The broadsword is made of an unknown metal material, with a flat and blunt blade and a transparent crystal core on the handle. It looks like a heavy black iron ruler on the surface. Wang Daipen took out the broadsword, first waved his hand, and wiped the blade carefully like caressing a lover. The next second, Wang Daipen suddenly raised the broadsword, and the energy surged, and a ball of hot flames in his hand burst out. The strange thing is that the flames were all absorbed by the sawtooth broadsword at the moment of explosion. The transparent crystal core at the handle was instantly infused with deep red, and then the blade of the entire broadsword was burning with intense flames. Wang Daipen waved his arm holding the sword, and the deep red flame burning at the blade also erupted, and a billiard table next to him was instantly burned to charcoal. Good! Wang Daipen shouted, with obvious excitement in his voice, looking at the sawtooth broadsword in his hand like a treasure. Congratulations, boss, you got the artifact, and you are one step closer to ruling the Jade Sea. The compliments of his subordinates reached Wang Daipen's ears, and Wang Daipen's eyes were full of disdain. Rule the Jade Sea. I want more than just a small Jade Sea base. The seed of ambition, like the flames wrapped around the sawtooth broadsword, continued to grow and expand in Wang Daipen's heart. Whether it is this Jade Sea base or Xiao Hanyan, the Ice Queen, they all have to crawl at his feet. The Awakener trial has begun. How are our people preparing? The thug next to him replied, Yes, boss. Now Wei Ying is ready to let those awakened ones lead the team. At present, the strongest among those awakened ones should be the Ice Lord Mu Qiu, who has been in the limelight recently. A hint of teasing flashed in Wang Daipen's eyes. Ice Lord. How could Wang Daipen not guess that Xiao Hanyan was planning to train Mu Qiu to deal with him? However, Wang Daipen had no intention of letting the enemy grow up. Bone Dragon went out on a mission a few days ago, right? Wang Daipen grinned, revealing a mouthful of white teeth. Notify Sun Wei and let him get in touch with Bone Dragon. It's time to teach our Bing Jun a lesson. Dare to provoke my Shenlong club, you will pay the price in blood. Wang Daipen had already given orders to his subordinates while chatting and laughing, then picked up a jacket on the sofa and put it on, lit a cigarette and said with a smile. Let's go, let me see this wonderful hunting show. In the huge training base, Wei Ying looked at the noisy crowd and frowned slightly. He couldn't understand why Xiao Hanyan agreed to Wang Daipen's proposal before. In his opinion, it was just a joke. The combat power of the awakened is limited, and letting these children who have not grown up face the zombies alone is tantamount to sending them to death. When Wei Ying asked Xiao Hanyan about his thoughts, the leader of the Yuhei base only replied with 5 words. This is the end of the world. The surging and terrifying zombie tide, the mysterious and insidious alien cult members, and the intrigues within the base. At this critical moment when the storm is about to come, there is no time for these children to grow up. It's life or death. Xiao Hanyan's thoughts are very decisive, but this is also the most straightforward reality. If these children don't have the courage to resist even this small zombie tide, let alone the huge risks they will encounter in the future. The faces of many awakened people in the audience were full of worry, and many children even cried when they heard that they had to fight those zombies. Wei Ying took out the whistle in his arms, and the clear whistle sounded throughout the audience, and also calmed down the noisy awakened people temporarily. Surrounded by many eyes, Wei Ying slowly said, The area where you are going to conduct the trial this time is located in the yellow zone of Lannan City. Due to the last siege against the alien cult, all the high-level zombies in it have been killed, and the only ones left are some ordinary zombies below level B. Hearing this news, many awakened people, including the instructor, felt a little relieved. At least it shows that this is not a suicide mission. Now the ordinary zombies in the yellow zone have a tendency to condense into a giant zombie tide, and your task is to eliminate as many zombie heretics as possible in the 3-day time limit. Each instructor's students form a team. Taking the number of crystal cores as an example, different levels of crystal cores can be exchanged for corresponding points. The top 3 teams with the highest total points can enter the exchange office to select any equipment below S level. The top 5 teams have the right to apply to join the law enforcement team, and the team that persists to the end can also choose B-level equipment in the exchange office, M. Wei Ying looked around and found that most of the awakened people were still in deep thought, and then said, "Of course, the purpose of the base conducting this trial is not to let you die. In this operation, each team will have its own instructor accompanying them. Under normal circumstances, teachers are not allowed to interfere with the hunting of the team. In an emergency, the instructor can make an exception to rescue the students, but accordingly, the entire team will lose the qualification for the trial. Risks are always accompanied by opportunities." The rewards proposed by Wei Ying even tempted the veteran awakeners who guided the children. They have witnessed the powerful power of the high-tech equipment in the exchange office. They are very painful to replace any piece of equipment in it. Now they can let these fledgling children choose it themselves, which is really a great bargain. Not to mention the generous treatment of joining the law enforcement team. After hearing this, these veteran awakeners wished they were a few decades younger and joined this trial. Wei Ying looked at the awakeners with slightly excited faces, which was very different from their desperate reactions just now. It is true that there must be brave men under heavy rewards. He sighed and shook his head, and turned his gaze to the dozens of law enforcement team members behind him. These law enforcement team members understood, and suddenly a surge of energy emerged from their bodies, and their bodies began to change one by one. Some grew a pair of wings on their backs, some simply turned into flying birds and geese, and some awakened people's bodies even turned into some flying insects. Hundreds of awakened people in the stadium looked up in surprise, and they suddenly found that these law enforcement team members were all mutant awakened people with the ability to fly. What made them even more curious was that the awakened people in these law enforcement teams were all carrying camera-like shooting equipment. Wei Ying took out the communication equipment in his arms and whispered. Then, huge white curtains appeared on the walls near the streets of the entire Yuhei base, which surprised many human survivors. In order to ensure the safety of the awakened and the fairness of the trial, each team will be equipped with a law enforcement team member holding a monitoring device throughout the trial. They will follow the team conducting the trial throughout the process, and the pictures will be transmitted to the big screens throughout the base. In other words, tens of thousands of survivors in the Yuhei base will watch the trial. This is not only a trial for awakened people, but also a live broadcast for all humans in the base. Sign in at the end of the world. Start by devouring the Flame Demon Lord. Author, Mo Xianyu. Chapter 137. Lilei. In the ruins of the city, a young girl was surrounded by dozens of zombies. The hideous zombies waved their sharp claws to wrap the girl up, as if they could see the girl's body being torn apart in the next second. Han Mai Mei. Not far from the girl, a teenager who looked about the same age as the girl was also fighting with several zombies. When the boy saw the girl in danger, he was shocked and shouted loudly. His supernatural power was activated. His body doubled in size in an instant, his cheekbones protruded, his hair grew wildly, and he gradually turned into a canine. A wide tongue stretched out and instantly whipped the zombies around him. The licking dog that the boy transformed into used his hands and feet, and flew and knocked away several zombies around the girl, blocking the girl. At this moment, the girl was frightened by the astonishing number of terrifying zombies. She curled up behind a licking dog with a terrified face, and her supernatural power had long been forgotten. The indignant licker who stood in front of the girl faced the attack of dozens of zombies alone. In just a few breaths, there were several scars on his body, and his gray hair was covered with blood. A few hundred meters away from the two, there were also several young awakeners fighting zombies. Although these awakeners have different abilities, their power is not weak in this class. But these student-like awakeners obviously have not experienced any big scenes. At this moment, they are also panicked in the face of such a large number of zombies. They have nowhere to release their abilities and fall into a dilemma in a few rounds. Looking back at Lilei and Hanmaime, after Lilei's licker killed the zombies in the front row, his huge body covered with bloodstains could not support it at all. He fell to the ground and returned to human form. At this moment, in front of them, there were still dozens of zombies with ferocious faces attacking them. Alas! At this moment, a long sigh came from the building next to it, and then a wave of energy directly shattered the windows of the building. A stone man with a black-gray body and his whole body turned into solid rock jumped down from the building. The huge momentum smashed a hole in the ground, and the zombies around Lilei and Hanmaime were crushed into pieces of meat by the stone man. Teacher. Lilei and Hanmaime looked at the stone man who fell from the sky, and their faces showed a look of relief for surviving the disaster. The stone man heard the call of the students behind him, but he turned a deaf ear to it. He looked up at the sky and sighed. "We give up, www." Then he drove his solid rock body to run to the other students to rescue them. And in the sky where the stone man looked, there was a law enforcement team member holding a camera device flying in the sky. The scene on the ground was also transmitted to the Yuhei base dozens of kilometers away by the monitoring equipment. The streets of the base were paved with huge white curtains, which showed the battle scenes between the awakened and the zombies. Both the survivors and the awakened who were watching the trial in the base shook their heads and sighed that it was a pity. Abstention means the end of this trial. These students can only join the search team to explore resources in the more dangerous urban ruins in the future to make a living. If they perform well, they will have the opportunity to join the law enforcement team. But there is no doubt that this awakened trial is the easiest way to join the law enforcement team. In a high-rise building in the center of Yuhei, in a spacious conference room, a group of senior executives of Yuhei base also sat here to watch this trial that shows the strength of the new awakened. Haha, the awakened under President Wang are really outstanding. With a little training, they will be the backbone of the base. Zhang Qinggui, who looked blessed, pinched the rosary with his hands and looked at the picture on the screen with a charitable smile on his face. If someone in the base shows signs of awakening superpowers, it will attract the attention of the three major forces, and those with outstanding talents will be recruited by the three forces with huge benefits. Even the law enforcement team is more or less mixed with people from other forces. After all, although the Yuhei base is a collective shelter for human survivors, there are still some barriers between the various forces, but it has not reached the level of infighting. Wang Daipen, who was praised by Zhang Qinggui, leaned on the chairs on both sides with his arms and smiled nonchalantly. My Shenlong Club will never raise useless people. The huge screen divided the trial scene into dozens of pictures, and the wonderful performance of the team will be switched to the entire screen. Dozens of awakened teams are scattered in various areas on the edge of Lannan City. They will prevent the zombies from joining together by hunting zombies. However, most of these awakened people are still young children. Not only do they have no combat experience, but they are also facing so many zombies for the first time. Many awakened people who were highly expected and gifted before were frightened to the point of their legs limp when they saw the ferocious zombies. How could they hunt zombies in such a state? On the contrary, there were many children with mediocre abilities who mustered up the courage to fight zombies and became dark horses in the trial for a while. Seeing that several teams had given up in less than half a day, Wei Ying's face could not help but condense. he was worried about the future of the base. Turning his gaze to other teams, suddenly, a burst of electric noise came from the screen in the corner of the screen. The whole screen quickly switched to the scene in the corner, but the first thing that came to the fore was the miserable and painful wail of the awakened. "Monster, monster! It's coming towards me, save me!" The base requests support, requests. Intermittent roars came along with the awakened one's shrill cries for help. Immediately afterwards, the screen began to tremble violently. A huge black shadow flashed across the screen. Several figures of awakened people fell to the ground one after another. In the end, the surveillance camera turned into a snowflake. Obviously, a team of awakened people encountered a high-level terrifying monster. Even the teacher who led the team was no match for them. In the end, the law enforcement team member responsible for photography was also buried in the corpse. In this case, even if we send rescue immediately, it will be too late. Everyone was wiped out. All the senior officials present were silent, but no one showed any look of horror. This kind of situation is extremely common in the apocalypse. Every day, awakened members of the search team die miserably in urban ruins full of zombie monsters. In this zombie wave, most of them are low-level zombies of C level and D level. The possibility of high-level zombies that even the leadership teacher cannot deal with is extremely slim. Soon, the base's senior officials turned their attention to other teams. The demise of this team did not cause any waves in their hearts. Facts have proved that this awakener trial is still very effective. The emergence of a large number of awakened dark horses has successfully slowed down the progress of the zombie tide. If this momentum continues, this inexplicable small zombie tide will recede soon. Xiao Hanyan, who had been silent all this time, focused his gaze on the corner of the curtain. That was the Awakener trial team under the leadership of Mu Qiu. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MOCNU. Chapter 138. Located in the suburbs of Lannan City, there is also a trial team of awakened people surrounded by zombies. Hundreds of zombies are attracted by fresh flesh and blood, and the desire for killing and bloodthirstiness emerges in their hideous faces. The three awakened people besieged by these hundreds of terrifying zombies are Mu Qiu's three students. Unlike the situation of other trial teams, the three people surrounded did not show any panic on their faces, but their faces were calm, with a faint, teasing in their eyes. Lin Feng, the most jumpy of the three, found a pair of goggles from somewhere and put them on his forehead, wearing a pair of pure white cotton gloves on his hands, looking like a middle school boy in some hot-blooded comics. Facing the zombies rushing towards them, Lin Feng grinned, and two balls of red flames erupted from his hands out of thin air, wrapping the pure cotton gloves. The next second, the pair of pure cotton gloves that should have been burned by the flames turned into metal hand armor at some point, and a huge X pattern on the back of the hand emitted a bright light. Lin Feng waved his hands, and the flames on his gloves surged like a wave, gradually wrapping his body. The young man swung his palms forward, and the red rising flames all rushed forward. The zombies in front were attacked by this fiercely burning flame, and their bodies were burned violently. However, within a few breaths, dozens of zombies had been buried in the sea of fire, and their bodies were burned into charcoal. In addition to the hundreds of zombies in front, the three people were also crowded with hideous zombie monsters on all sides. Shueqianya, who was standing behind Lin Feng, suddenly flashed a strange purple light in her eyes, and a wave of invisible but cold supernatural power waves spread like ripples. The zombies who were the first to bear the brunt were immediately infected by this strange supernatural power wave, and their white pupils suddenly became deep and hollow, and then the violent intention in their eyes became stronger, and they turned to attack the group of zombies behind them. Biting, tearing, hitting, it was like the primitive people's desperate offensive on these controlled zombies. And on these zombies, there were bursts of corpse chi spreading, all absorbed into the black round ring on Shueqinya's fingertips. Shwekinya, who was nourished by the corpse chi, had a deeper purple light in her eyes. The most obvious manifestation was that more and more zombies were controlled by her, and they turned to stare at each other with bloodthirsty eyes and killed each other. The last of the three, Su Wen, was not idle either. She stroked the brown-haired squirrel on her shoulder and whistled softly. Mau mau. A bird's cry came from the sky, and a palm-sized sparrow flew over at a high speed. When it was about to land on the ground, its body suddenly grew larger, and the petite sparrow gradually turned into a wild goose with supernatural energy. Although the supernatural energy of this sparrow named Mau Mau was only at the sea level, it had the advantage of airspace, huge size, and swift offensive. Its sharp claws could tear a zombie in two every time it leaned over. Hundreds of zombies seemed to have no pressure in front of these three children. They were easily solved by these students in just a quarter of an hour. The strength of these three students is so strong, some awakened people in the search team are just like this, right? In the conference room, a group of Yuhei executives sat around the table, staring at the wonderful performance of Lin Feng and the other two in amazement. It was difficult for even some adult awakened people in the search team to solve the zombies of a block at such a fast speed. It was incredible that the scene was done by three children. Bing Jun's level of teaching students is really superb. If nothing unexpected happens, this team must be among the top 3 in this trial. John Kingwei was also quite surprised by the performance of Lin Feng and the other two, but he quickly reacted and looked at Xiao Hanyan with a smile. It's true that a good teacher produces good students. Xiao Hanyan nodded slightly, her face normal. For some reason, she had a vague feeling that this trial would not be as simple as it seemed. Flame Fist. The red-haired Lin Feng swung his flaming fist and blew up the head of the last zombie. At this moment, a large number of charred corpses were lying at his feet. Under the effect of the X-gloves, the violent energy in his body was greatly suppressed. Now, as long as he did not completely overload his energy, he could use part of the flame energy in his body without losing control. Something is wrong. Shwekinya seemed to sense something and suddenly raised her eyes to look forward. Lin Feng also followed Shwekinya's gaze and saw that a large number of zombies had gathered on the other side of the suburbs. A hoarse humming sound reached his ears, and judging from the scale, there were at least thousands of zombies. The three of them looked at each other without hesitation. Go first. Retreat. Shwekinya controlled the zombies in front to rush towards the zombie group. A cloud of grey mist emanated from the round ring on her finger. When the grey mist spread and wrapped her whole body, Shwekinya's figure disappeared. Su Wen patted the squirrel on her shoulder, and the brown-haired squirrel immediately jumped down, and its body quickly grew larger, turning into the size of a wild boar. Su Wen jumped and sat on the head of the giant squirrel, shouting, "Kuakuo, go!" The squirrel crawled frantically on all fours after hearing the command, and appeared dozens of meters away in a flash. "Hey, wait for me!" Looking at the disappearance of his companions, Lin Feng was dumbfounded. He put his hands behind his back, and a ball of violent flames erupted. The whole person rushed forward with the power of the flames. WWW. Before leaving, Lin Feng did not forget to make a face at the zombies behind him. "Come and chase me." And this scene was seen by the senior executives of Yuhei Base. In the conference room, the corners of the senior executives' mouths twitched, and they looked at each other and fell into a strange silence again. Lin Feng and his three people did not look like they were facing a life and death test in the urban wasteland. Instead, they looked like they were playing in an amusement park on vacation. The style of this team is so different from other teams, right? Lin Feng and his three people were extremely fast, but they still underestimated the huge number of zombies. Just after getting rid of a group of zombies, the three of them were chased by another group of zombies with thousands of people. Lin Feng's speed under the blessing of the flame was no slower than Su Wen's squirrel, and Shwekinya's figure soon appeared beside the two of them. Obviously, they were a little exhausted after running for a long time. The three members of the team ran to an open-air resort hotel next to the suburbs. Feeling the surging tide of corpses behind him, Lin Feng quickly pushed open the gate of the courtyard. Then, he saw an extremely speechless scene. In the sandpit on the artificial turf, the delicate-looking Yuichi, wearing a white dress, was carefully building a sandman. It seemed that because of too much concentration, she didn't know that there was a little mud on her face. And on a lounge chair in the middle of the yard, a shirtless man was wearing sunglasses, leaning against the swimming pool and lazily enjoying the sunbathing. What really made Lin Feng and the other two speechless was that this man lying on the chair with a leisurely face like a salted fish was their teacher. Other teachers followed closely behind their students, fearing that their disciples' lives would be lost. And their teacher was actually lying in a resort hotel a few kilometers away, enjoying the sun at a leisurely time during their crisis. Book Friends, Skirt, 5, 9, Spirit, 1, 3, 9, Slip, 2, 1. Password, not short. Friends who like this book can go in. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 139. Miu lay flat on the beach chair. Even when three students came running in panic, he just took off his sunglasses lazily, turned his head and looked at Lin Feng and the other two, and said with a smile. Are you tired? Come and take a break. Lin Feng and the other two. We are hunting zombies at all costs, and you are lying here leisurely in the sun? Although they have long been accustomed to their teacher's style, they still feel like crying but have no tears at such a critical moment. Compared with other emerging awakeners who are well cared for by teachers, they are like hounds released outdoors. As if sensing the emotions of the three students, Miu raised his head and pointed at a member of the law enforcement team flying in the sky. Indicating that this is a live broadcast throughout the process, he can't do anything. Miu understands that the purpose of this live broadcast is to monitor to prevent the awakeners from cheating, and it is also a kind of alternative protection for those children. When Miu saw the law enforcement team member with a pair of bird wings, he waved his hand with a camera in his hand and gave a slightly flattering smile. The law enforcement team member was also in awe of Yu Haibingjun, who had recently gained great fame in the base. A rare twin superpower, he killed many zombies in Lannan City in one battle, dared to resist the attack of the White Death God at level A, and later defeated the shadow guards around Wangdaepen in one fell swoop. Now he is being trained by the queen of the base, Xiao Hanyan. All these achievements are beyond the imagination of ordinary awakeners like him. In the Yuhei base, hundreds of kilometers away, countless humans saw Miu lying flat, and their faces were all weird, with twitching mouth corners. Zhang Qinggui smiled and said to Xiao Hanyan, this Bingjun is indeed a gifted talent. Even his actions are different from those of ordinary people. Zhang admires him very much for his straightforwardness. Xiao Hanyan swept her cold eyes over Zhang Qinggui, who smiled and stopped talking. Xiao Hanyan looked at the battle situation on the screen again. The ferocious roars of zombies came from their ears. Lin Feng and the other two understood that the zombie army behind them was catching up again. Without time to think about it, the three of them immediately turned around and ran in another direction. They had consumed too much physical strength in the previous battle, and it would be wise to hunt zombies after they had enough energy. As for Miu, after 2 months of getting along, the three students knew the character of this salted fish teacher too well. In this case, they were already thankful that they did not add fuel to the fire. Watching the three students leave, and the cameraman of the law enforcement team followed them, Miu's mouth slightly raised, lying on the beach chair without any intention of moving. The sound of zombies surging in his ears became clearer and clearer, and Mu Chiu finally stood up slowly, stretched and said, "Really, a rare vacation, but it is disturbed." The gate of the courtyard was madly crashed, and under the violent collision, the copper-cast and iron-cast fence gate was broken in an instant, smoke and dust scattered, and countless bloodthirsty eyes rushed in from the smoke. The hideous face was like a devil crawling out of the depths of hell, with sharp teeth and claws to tear all the creatures in front of it. "You can leave." The slender body stood up straight, and the man still had a gentle smile on his face, as if he was entertaining a sudden guest. The black windbreaker fluttered, and suddenly, a mass of black mist appeared around the man, and a terrifying and trembling invisible pressure radiated like ripples. The black gas that seemed to be substantial turned into the shape of a dragon, with bloodthirsty red eyes flashing, and the big mouth with fangs opened instantly devoured the corpses of hundreds of people. The moment it touched the corpses, the black dragon suddenly exploded and turned into a dark fog, and the zombies that looked like evil spirits began to burn violently the moment they touched the black fog. A trace of human panic appeared in the originally pale and lifeless pupils of those zombies. This is the fear of the lower to the upper, which is the most primitive instinct of living things. In less than a blink of an eye, hundreds of zombies had been burned into pieces of slag by the black flames, and only the black carbon gravel left by the participants on the ground. During the whole process, Mu Chiu stood quietly in the same place, only a flash of red light flashed in the depths of his pupils, and then disappeared in a flash, and the black flames as dark as ink also disappeared in an instant. "Chiu." At this moment, Yui Chi in the sand pit beside him suddenly called Mu Chiu. Mu Chiu turned his head and found that the pink-haired girl had piled up two sand figures with sand at some point, and their appearance was exactly the replica of Yui Chi and Mu Chiu. Mu Chiu didn't know whether to laugh or cry, and stepped forward to rub the girl's soft hair, wiped the remaining sand on the girl's face, and smiled. "Next, it depends on those little brats." Mu Chiu narrowed his eyes slightly and looked up at the distant horizon. That was an area deep in Lannan City. For some reason, Mu Chiu always had an inexplicable feeling, as if there was a familiar breath calling him from afar. "What is there?" Lin Feng and his two companions fled all the way, and encountered some scattered zombies again during the period, but these ordinary zombies were not the enemy of the three people at all, and the streets were stained with fire and blood along the way. Just when the three people fled to an alley, several figures suddenly appeared at the end of the alley. Looking closely, these figures were also awakened people who went out for trials like Lin Feng and his two companions. "Wang Yuan, what are you doing here? Leave quickly, and there are corpses behind you." Lin Feng shouted, but the awakened people in front of him showed no appreciation and looked at Lin Feng and the others with sinister smiles. Just then, a middle-aged man with a strong build and tattoos on his face walked out of the corner. "Brother Sun just wants us to get rid of these three brats. Brother Ma, they heard that he is a student of that Bing Jun. Let's do this." There are awakened people who are still more afraid of Mu Chiu. Whatever, there will be no evidence to prove it. Besides, there is no telling whether Mu Chiu will be alive after tomorrow. All the conversations between these people were overheard by Lin Feng and the others. In other words, these people had no intention of concealing their intentions at all. Lin Feng knew that the awakened people participating in the trial who were blocking the road were all Wang Daipan's men, and he angrily said, "You dare to be so bold, aren't you afraid that the base will kill you if they find out? The name Ji Yufeng, the white god of death, is not something you just say casually." As soon as he finished speaking, a figure covered in blood suddenly fell from the sky. I saw that the member of the law enforcement team who had been following Lin Feng and the others was unexpectedly attacked and killed at some point, and the camera device was trampled to pieces by the strong man. An awakened person also wearing the uniform of a law enforcement team slowly descended from the sky, also holding a camera equipment upside down in his hand. The awakened member of the law enforcement team looked at Lin Feng and the other three, then turned to the burly man and said, "Be sharp, I can't hide it from the base for too long. Lin Feng and the others didn't know at this moment that this member of the law enforcement team had already been bribed by Wang Daipen. There's a mole. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mo Xian Yu. Chapter 140. The sturdy man looked at the students beside him. They were all gifted elites specially recruited by Shen Glonghui. They had already received cruel hell-like training before participating in this awakener trial. The ordinary awakeners who participated in the trial could not be compared with them at all. Now one of the law enforcement team members responsible for transferring the screen was bribed by him, and the other was dead. Even the signal for transmitting communication was blocked by him. It was really a perfect hunting opportunity. Hurry up and finish it. There will be a big reward from Boss Wang. The middle-aged man stepped aside and handed the work to his students. In his opinion, he didn't need to take action to deal with these three little ghosts. Several awakeners understood, smiled sinisterly and looked at Lin Feng and the other two. Some of them looked at Shui Qianya and Su Wen with ill intentions. It seems that you are really stubborn. Lin Feng lowered his head, put on the goggles on his forehead, and his eyes converged. Many awakened people, including the sturdy man, were confused. Could this kid be scared silly? Lin Feng suddenly raised his head, with red eyes, and slowly raised his hands. The original pure white cotton gloves were replaced by a pair of high-tech hand armors, and there was a fierce crimson flame burning on them. Looking for death. A surging wave of flames exploded around the boy, and the two companions next to him suddenly burst out with powerful energy. A wave of powerful energy rushed towards him, and even the middle-aged man standing in the corner couldn't help but shrink his pupils and look horrified. You guys. Use the strategy you talked about before. Elsewhere on the street in Lannan City, a fat man in a plaid shirt stood on the platform, anxiously directing the students in front of him, wishing he could jump up and replace them. Although this trial clearly stipulates that teachers are not allowed to take action, the fat man's behavior of directing from the side is not a violation. After all, awakened people usually use communicators to transmit information and follow commands when exploring ruins, and clarify the route. Not far in front of the fat man, several of his students were also facing the terrifying zombies that were surging. Hearing the fat man's roar, the leading boy looked tangled. Is it really necessary? If possible, he really didn't want to use the strategy that the teacher said. But the zombies were getting closer and closer to him, and the boy made up his mind, took out a smoke bomb from his pocket, and threw it at the zombies in front without hesitation. This special smoke bomb can not only blind the sight, but also block the zombies' sense of smell for a short time. A large group of white smoke rose from the ground, and the figures of the fat man and several students disappeared. When the smoke dissipated, the zombies rushed in one direction. A few minutes later, in front of the door of a roadside business hall, a wallpaper suddenly opened, and the figures of Fatty and several students also appeared. Several students behind him were breathing heavily, obviously facing these numerous terrible zombies for the first time. Teacher, is it really okay for us to do this? The leading boy asked Fatty with a tangled face. He felt that this behavior was too despicable. What do you know? This is called strategy. Fatty sneered, looked at the empty street, and snorted coldly. Being able to survive in this ruin is a skill. As long as you can survive to the end, there will be rewards. It's better than those teams that were wiped out, right? This is the valuable experience that Fatty has gained in the ruins for a long time. Now he is passing it on to his disciples, but he didn't expect that the students would be quite ungrateful. Let them fight, maybe they will all die by then, and in the end, won't we advance to the top 3? Several students nodded, looking as if they understood. The law enforcement team members who were floating in the sky and recording all this with cameras in their hands were stunned when they saw this scene. How could there be such shameless people? Now listen to what I said before, prepare the food, go to the basement you found before and squat, and run out when the trial is over. The fat man commanded several students and once again set a shameless record. At this moment, the ground under the feet of everyone began to tremble wildly. "Old teacher, what do you see?" The student next to him pointed to the distance with trembling hands, and several people turned their heads to look, and their faces immediately became horrified. Suddenly, a dark mass of black figures with no visible edges rushed to the edge of the sky. Each huge body contained strong muscles and exuded strong supernatural fluctuations. The fierce and violent roars came from afar, and even the ground under the feet of several people was shaken by the rubble and dust. After staring at the distance for a long time, the fat man seemed to have discovered something, and he stammered to the law enforcement team members in the sky, "It's life-threatening, hurry, hurry, call for support from the base." Hundreds of kilometers away, among the Yuhei senior management, Wei Ying, who received the latest news, walked quickly to Xiao Hanyan with a gloomy face. "Major, the monsters on the edge of the red zone of Lannan City suddenly moved, and are now gathering together and rushing towards the yellow zone. If this continues, we will meet the awakened people who are undergoing trials in the yellow zone soon." Looking at the scale, the number of mid and high-level heretics added together. No less than thousands. Thousands of zombie monsters. The senior executives around the desks also became a little embarrassed, not only because the trial went wrong, but more because they didn't understand why the monsters in the red zone were suddenly alarmed. "You know, the number of awakened people in the entire Yuhei base is less than 10,000, but now there are thousands of mid and high-level monsters rushing out of the city, so the next target of the invasion is not their human shelters." Xiao Hanyan's face condensed, and after thinking for a moment, he said to Wei Ying, "Immediately notify the trial team led by the teacher in Lannan City to gather and delay the progress of the zombie tide. Ji Yufeng, you should immediately lead the law enforcement team to Lannan City and annihilate all these monsters. More than 1,000 mid and high-level monsters may be terrifying to these emerging awakened people, but it is not a problem to deal with them under the clearing of Ji Yufeng and the law enforcement team." Ji Yufeng's eyes flashed, and he said indifferently, "Yes. Don't let anything go wrong again." Xiao Hanyan looked coldly at the screen showing various images. When she saw the image of Mu Qiu and his students was a piece of gray snow, her brows were furrowed, and her mind became more and more uneasy.